Bill Watts was welcoming us with Tony Schiavone, and then he launches into why his son, Erik Watts, has been suspended. That reason didn't... Okay, right, I know what the reason is because I had to look it up, but the fact is that the reason wasn't actually explained whatsoever on the Clash show. Do you remember what the reason was? I mean, it's storyline-wise, but do you remember what the reason was?
Yeah, that there was some that Erik was accused of something. I forget, but I remember at the time thinking like, this is silly. Like, this is not like, doesn't feel like wrestling. But as I watched it back last night, if you stop it and just look at it just as is, it sounds almost identical to what would happen today, right? I accuse my boss of sexual harassment in the workplace, and there's going to be stop. There's going to be, you go home, you're paid leave. We're going to do an investigation, and so it seemed almost like way before its time as I'm watching this. I want to say a note about Erik. Great guy. Had been a football player, big college football player. Had been brought in, and I don't think in the most optimal of circumstances. There was a way to do that prior. Maybe that might have been the way prior, but the fact that he had not been in wrestling at all, and the boss's kid pops up, just reeked of nepotism, and that was unfair to Erik. It really was. I mean, God Almighty, this business is hard enough. We've talked about this ad nauseum to learn without that kind of added pressure to it. I thought he gave a decent promo. It looked at times to me like he was trying to remember checklists, things he was supposed to say. But again, that's exactly what I would expect for a kid. And at this time, he's a kid in our business. The football aside, he's brand new to wrestling, and every wrestling fan knew, obviously who his dad was, and it's almost like when David Flair. It is like when David Flair came in. Man, he was screwed from the start because he's a second generation of perhaps the greatest wrestler in the history of our business. And I don't care how good you are, you're going to pale in comparison. And the same thing here. But that what the fans are seeing on camera was part of it. There was also another part behind the scenes that was vicious at times. I saw him, Bill, that is, walk up to Erik and completely unassumingly walks up and you point out to Chris, I said, look at Bill's fingers in that thing. He said they have those sausage hands, and he comes up and he just upper hook right into the short rib. Oh, knocks. And when Erik goes to bend over, he yelled, I didn't tell you to stand the hell up. And he stands there and he punches him again and does like 2 or 3 times so he can't get up. And he goes, that's how you sell a punch. Because he'd worked with Kabuki that night and didn't sell on the ropes that well. I'm thinking, ooh, man, like this is long before me being a father, but now I can't see myself in any way doing that with my kids. I'm not judging Bill here. Again, different times, different places, but that wasn't a tough spot. That was an impossible spot for Erik, unless he was going to come in and be Flair times 3, and learning on this job is not a very forgiving thing. I always thought it would have been much better suited to bring him in as an underneath guy under a hood, let him get some experience in the ring, then expose him later if you want to, and try that route. But you'd asked a second ago, and I gave that long-winded answer about like things that were going wrong in the business. That was one of the types of things that was going wrong in the business. The business as it was waning in this valley period. The last thing we needed was, here's a gratuitous, here's my kid, love him, throw him on the stage, and now you haven't beaten Arn, and you haven't beaten, big names and stuff. And that's sacrilege to wrestling fans. Wrestling fans will take to you, but it's going to take time. You got to earn their respect. And when you finally earn their respect, they'll slowly transition to that. But they ain't going to, here's my kid today, first day in wrestling. He's going to beat the biggest name in the business, or one of them. And it was unfair to Erik, but again, I think Bill was just trying something, just trying to shake it up and trying to find something that would stick to the wall.
I've interviewed Erik as well. I've spoken to him a few times, and really personable guy, and he's full of charisma as well. And
yes.
The thing is, he would have had, if given seasoning, something proper to offer the business because he had the right height, he had the lineage. Obviously, Bill Watts is his dad and everything. I'll get to a couple of different things. I'll probably ask you some other stuff as well relating to Erik. The reason why Erik was quote unquote suspended was because Arn Anderson, this is a pre-tape, Arn Anderson attacked him at a petrol station, gas station, which is what you would call it.
Yep.
And then Arn attacks him, and then Erik puts the dreaded shoots fight hold, the STF, on Arn Anderson in front of a fan cam, and that's why he ended up being taken off the show for storyline reasons. Now, this really didn't help for a couple of reasons. One, Erik stuttered his way through that interview. You could hear people booing in the background. And then when it goes back to Bill, and keep in mind, this is 1993. You do not hear this very often. It's not like the John Cena days or the Roman Reigns days with mixed crowd reactions. You can hear fans screaming, "Erik Watts sucks," while his dad was giving a thing to the camera, a thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It also doesn't help that Arn Anderson is one of the most respected wrestlers, even back then, and one of the best wrestlers in WCW. And it also suddenly didn't help that Arn Anderson had given an interview maybe a week or two earlier that aired on TV that was great. And it was so intense that he just ended up engendering more fan love through it as well. I also wrote this down. Erik Watts is backstage and he says there are accusations. So he sort of blows acquisitions and accusations there on that one.
Yeah.
Anything else that I want to bring up with Erik, or tell you, in fact, is, or ask you, I'm sorry, I'm not telling you, is how nuclear... Well, Erik Watts had a few weeks training before he was put on the road. How nuclear was the heat with Erik Watts, especially when he turned up in a Porsche?
Well, not so much with the boys. I mean, nobody was blaming him for being there. And like you said, he's very personable, easy to get along with. Nice guy. It wasn't that, but it was, sort of like you'd hear some later with with Bill Goldberg, with people that have been around the business. They're like, hey, this ain't fair. Like I've been here all this time, and there's a sort of a perceived pecking order. But when you're saying that, you were just mentioning it, and they're doing the interview, which was, I'm sure, pre-taped, and you hear the crowd chanting this stuff. Rest assured, Erik, no matter where he is in the building while this is airing, he's hearing this. And when you're a young kid in this business, you're a baby face. You go out there and you show fire and you hear crickets, right? It's like, it's a slog. And so, being so new to the business and being so young in it, I can't even imagine being thrown into that flame, weeks into training, with just a few weeks under your belt. Again, he's very smart guy. So, he knows the nepotistic side of the way this looks. And then you start hearing that, and then that creates self-doubt. And then that itself becomes a vicious cycle. It was just a really, really, I think, wrong thing to do, and sad, because I'm sure, given time to grow into the business like any of us, he's a good athlete, he would have found it, and especially with that dressing room to teach. But it was overtly, it looked like what it was. Here's the boss going to try to, with all this talk about, if you get into a fight and you get beat, don't come back, you're going to get fired. Legitimacy. Boom, here's my kid. It was just incongruous, and it was a disservice to Erik. It was a disservice to the fans, and I can't say what went into Bill's thinking. I'm sure part of it, love for kid, and try to help him out. It's really ill-advised. I don't see how you could delude yourself and think that would work. And there's no harm, no foul. Every single one of us in that dressing room came up that way, and setting the ring up and earning your way in, and being manhandled in that ring and stuff, and learning. So that all of these things, like I said a second ago, they're all happening concurrently. They're all happening at the same time. And so you can see where the fan base would be dwindling away. They're really, if I was to say to you, give me a word or a sentence paraphrasing that Clash of Champions, what would you say? I mean, it's rise of the young guys, slewing off of
transitional. Felt like a transitional show. You've got some of the old, a lot of the new. Ric Flair's not returned yet. So, yeah, it's very much just sort of like in that netherworld in between the old and new.
And understand with Rick, I mean, Rick was a huge portion of that equation. He was the NWA, the WCW, right? So without him there, there's a gaping hole in this episode. And everybody says they want to book. We talked about Tony Khan and booking. Booking ain't an easy thing. It ain't just simple to sit down and okay, Jane with wrestle Shane tonight, and then we'll do this and do that, and it's all going to draw money. I mean, you got to really think this stuff through, and then figure out how it's going to play in real world. Like, is this believable? Like the dumping of concrete into somebody's car. Okay, look, 911. Yeah, some jackass just dumped a bunch of concrete in my car. Yeah, he's driving a cement truck. I'm getting a new car, going to probably see you and win some money. You got to play that stuff through. And realistically, how is this going to be perceived by the audience that you're giving it to? And I think your word transitional is pretty good. Pretty accurate to what that show was. There were bright spots. I don't see anybody being lazy in the ring. It wasn't, somebody's half-assing it out there. But, when you got an audience that loves Flair or loves to hate Flair, either or, and Arn and all these iconic talents, and all of a sudden here's a whole lot of these new guys, and then like the segment where they had Harley and Paul and Vader attack Barb, it was just like so up and down, in and out. What is it like? Where are we going with it? It just seemed like just stuff being thrown on camera that really had no rhyme or reason or direction to it, to me anyway.
There's one more thing about Erik Watts. So Bill Watts went on the 1-900 WCW hotline and this is around the time of this show, I can't remember if it's before or after, to rip into Mark Madden over a parody he did of Bill and Erik and Dusty and Dustin Rhodes, revolving around a fictitious TBS broadcast skit that saw Dusty and Bill receive one last attempt to push their sons. And it culminated in Erik Watts being crucified, but making a comeback with, quote, Erik Watts arising on the third day to an arena near you.
I'm afraid later in ECW we'd have a similar with a upside down crucifix, right? It's wrestling is always parodying. We're playing off larger. If you go back and look at some of the extremely, by today's standards, racial stuff that we would see in wrestling, through the 50s and 60s, what it was doing was parodying society. And I think a lot of that goes into it. But when you start stepping onto stuff, we had an off-camera discussion about religion. When you start dealing, especially today, with people's political beliefs or people's religious beliefs or people's whatever core beliefs that they hold dear to them, you're almost always going to step on the mine. You're going to piss somebody off out there. And, pissing off can, some like heels piss fans off. That's the hope to bring them back, to bring some more people the next time. That's different than parodying religion or parodying somebody's political beliefs, or what they always talk about in real politics as the third rail. Don't touch it because you're going to get electrocuted. When I was watching the 900 commercial, it brought back memories. It seemed it was so ubiquitous back then. But on the thing it said, phone number no longer works, or phone number no longer in service, something like that. So people wouldn't be trying to see if Bill Watts is still on the 900 line. It was, but again, like if you're bringing people in like Mark, you know what Mark is, right? Mark's a contrarian. I've listened to him in Pittsburgh for decades now. If the Steelers have a good game today, he's going to go on the air tonight and say they sucked, because it stimulates conversation. Oh, I'll call that son of a bitch and tell him they didn't suck. They won today, right? He's playing a heel. And when you give somebody carte blanche and you're not going to be overseeing or telling them, hey, we want to do skits like this or that, don't be upset if somebody does something that offends you. I would say for Mark, he probably should have better taste and thought in that, you can see like in WCW and all these things we're talking about, there's all these loose strings blowing around that nobody seems to be in control of them. They're wondering why, the audience is dipping down and going where it's going. I mean, it's I'd be shocked if you at the end said complete sellout, turn away crowd. I mean, really? Well, that's impressive for that garbage, but I shouldn't say garbage for that show. Yeah, it just looks like the chaos that we've all come to analogize with WCW, right? I mean, this became the how not to do it company.